What is up, everybody? It's Animac here for Anime Uproar, and welcome to a brand new Code Geass video. In this video, we're going to be talking about how many of the Geass powers in Code Geass, including Lelouch's power to control people and make them do what he wants, appear to be based and directly inspired by spells in the iconic role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons. One of the reasons that I still love YouTube as a platform is that I personally have never played Dungeons and Dragons, so I never would have known about this connection between Dungeons and Dragons and Code Geass if Find a Bear didn't leave a comment on one of our Code Geass videos pointing out that a spell in Dungeons & Dragons called Geass, but spelled with one S instead of two, is very similar to the power that Lelouch has in Code Geass. So a huge thank you to Find the Bear for inspiring this video, and a big thank you as well to Divinity from our Discord server for pointing out that a whole bunch of other Geass powers other than Lelouch's power also correspond to spells in Dungeons and Dragons, but more on that a little later. If you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell for more Code Geass theory and news videos. And if you want to chat with us on a daily basis, you can join our Discord server. The link is in the description. Now, we know that in Irish mythology, a geas is an obligation or prohibition similar to being under a vow or a spell. A geas can be compared with a curse or, paradoxically, a gift. If someone under a geas violates the associated taboo, the infractor will suffer dishonor or even death. On the other hand, the observing of one's gyasa is believed to bring power. Often it is women who place gyasa upon men. In some cases, the woman turns out to be a goddess or other type of magical creature, which of course reminds us of C2's connection to Lelouch. In Dungeons and Dragons, the spell called Geass, spelled with one S, or also known as Quest, was an enchantment spell that commanded any subject to undertake a task or suffer possibly fatal pain and sickness. Arcane spellcasters and bards usually called this spell Geass, while divine spellcasters refer to it as Quest. And of course, we are already seeing huge similarities between Lelouch's Geass power to command individuals to do whatever he wants, and the spell called Geass, which also compels creatures to do whatever the user wants, and the penalty for not doing so can be deadly. The Geass spell can be used to coerce a creature to perform a task or restrain a creature from some sort of action. The casting time is 10 minutes, 24 seconds for the older version, and could not be willfully resisted. The subject had to be alive, conscious, intelligent enough to understand the instructions, and under control of their own mind. The instructions had to be given in a language understood by the subject and have to have clear conditions to be met for the Geass or Quest to be fulfilled. If the task was left open-ended without an end condition, the spell lasted for 1 day per experience level of the caster. Otherwise, the spell lasted until the task was complete, regardless of how long it took. Now, the really interesting thing here for me is that in Dungeons and Dragons, the individual that you are using this spell on has to be conscious, has to understand the language in which you are speaking, because this spell also works on a mental basis, on a consciousness basis, just like Geass does in the world of Code Geass. In fact, in Akito the Exiled, it is established that for a Geass power to work, the person you are using it on has to understand what you are commanding them to do. And because of this, Akito from Akito the Exiled did not die when his brother commanded him to, because he was too young to understand the concept of death. So in this sense, the Geass spell and Geass power appear to work on the same principle. It works on a mental level, and the person you are using it on has to understand what you are commanding them to do. However, there is a major difference. In Dungeons and Dragons, the Geass spell cannot be used to command anyone to commit suicide. However, we know that in Code Geass, Lelouch can use his power to command people to commit suicide, and of course, Shin Hyuga Shang, Akito's brother, can do the same thing as well. The other really interesting thing about the Geass spell is that the only way to remove this spell in the older version of Dungeons and Dragons from the subject was with a wish, a limited wish, or a miracle, which of course reminds us of C2 trying to have her wish fulfilled as part of her contract with Lelouch. From what I was able to gather, the Geass spell was introduced to Dungeons & Dragons way back in the first edition in 1978, so 30 years before Code Geass initially aired. And while some rules about the Geass spell have changed over the years, in general, the concept has remained relatively similar. And while this one Dungeons & Dragons spell by the name of Geass with one S that is very similar to Lelouch's Geass power is interesting on its own, I was able to learn, thanks to the help of Divinity from our Discord server, that there are a whole bunch of other Geass powers that seem to correspond directly or very closely to other spells in Dungeons & Dragons. I will talk about all of those now, and thanks again to Divinity for helping me out with this. As I said, I have not played Dungeons & Dragons, so I never would have been able to figure this out without his and Find a Bear's help. And if you want to learn more about Dungeons & Dragons, and I have to say it does sound interesting now that I've done all this research on the game, you can contact Divinity on Twitter. I will leave the link in the description. Starting things off with Mao's Geass, whose power is equivalent to the spell known as Detect Thoughts, although Mao's power is actually stronger than this spell in the game. For the duration of this spell, you can read the thoughts of certain creatures. When you cast the spell, and as your action on each turn until the spell ends, you can focus your mind on any one creature that you can see within 30 feet of you. Then we have Charles, whose Geass is equivalent to the spell known as Modify Memory. With Modify Memory, you can attempt to reshape another creature's memories. While this charm lasts, you can affect the target's memory of an event that it experienced within the last 24 hours and that lasted no more than 10 minutes. You can permanently eliminate all memory of the event, allow the target to recall the event with perfect clarity and exacting detail, change its memory of the detail of the event, or create a memory of some other event. C2's Geass is equivalent to the spell known as Charm Person, but modified. With Charm Person, you attempt to charm a humanoid you can see within range. It must make a wisdom saving throw, and does so with advantage if you or your companions are fighting it. If it fails, it is charmed by you until the spell ends, or until you or your companions do something harmful to it. At higher levels, when you cast this spell using a spell slot of 2nd level or higher, you can target one additional creature for each slot level above the first. They must be within 30 feet of each other when you target them. Bismarck Waldstein's Geass power is equivalent to the Foresight spell, and it is one of the higher ranked spells in Dungeons & Dragons due to its potency. With Foresight, you touch a willing creature and bestow a limited ability to see into the immediate future. For the duration of this spell, the target can't be surprised and has advantage on attack rolls, ability checks, and saving throws. Additionally, other creatures have a disadvantage on attack rolls against the target for the duration of this spell. Rollo's Geass power is equivalent to the spell known as Time Stop. With Time Stop, you briefly stop the flow of time for everyone but yourself. No time passes for other creatures, while you take 1d4 plus 1 turns in a row, during which you can use actions and move as normal. This spell ends if one of the actions you use during this period or any effects that you create during this period affects a creature other than you or an object being worn or carried by someone other than yourself. In addition, the spell ends if you move to a place more than 1,000 feet from the location where you cast it. So this spell, just like Rollo's Geass, has both time and range restrictions. Marianne's Geass has an equivalent in Dungeons & Dragons as well, and this spell is known as Life Force Exchange. With Life Force Exchange, the spell permanently switches the life forces of two creatures, one of which may be you, within 60 yards. Both recipients must be within range at the time the spell is completed, or it fails automatically. And this is just like Marianne having to use her Geass power on Anya because Anya was in the same room as Marianne when she got shot. In the event of a successful transfer, both life forces retain all of their original mental abilities and behavioral patterns, although their physical abilities are limited or possibly enhanced by their new forms. Even the power of characters from the Code Geass manga appears to be inspired by spells from Dungeons & Dragons. The power of Orpheus from Oz the Reflection has an equivalent in Dungeons & Dragons known as Disguise Self, and this is actually a low-level parlor trick spell in the game. With Disguise Self, you can make yourself, including your clothing, armor, weapons, and other belongings on your person, look different until the spell ends or until you can use an action to dismiss it. You can seem 1 foot shorter or taller and can appear thin, fat, or in between. You can't change your body type, so you must adopt a form that has the same basic arrangement of limbs. Otherwise, the extent of the illusion is up to you. The power of Clara Lanfranc from the Oz the Reflection manga is equivalent to the Geass spell just like Lelouch. The difference is that she has to call out the person's real name before controlling them. And Maribel Mel Britannia's Geass is an enhanced version or higher version of the same Geass spell, because Maribel is able to have complete control over a person's body. Toto Thompson's Geass is just like Charles's Geass, Modify Memory, but it is the weakest version of it as it can only erase a particular memory. The Dungeons & Dragons equivalent of the Shin Hyuga Shang Geass is known as Power Word Kill. You utter a word of power that can compel one creature you can see within range to die instantly. If the creature you choose has 100 hit points or fewer, it dies. Otherwise, the spell has no effect. Layla's Geass from Akito the Exiled is equivalent to the mightiest mortal spell known as Wish. Wish is the mightiest spell a mortal creature can cast. And by simply speaking aloud, you can alter the very foundations of reality in accordance with your desires. Finally, Jeremiah's Geass Canceller is similar to 2 different spells, Counterspell and Dispel Magic. Counterspell attempts to interrupt a creature in the process of casting a spell, and if successful, the creature spell fails and has no effect. Dispel Magic ends a current spell on one creature, object, or magical effect within range. What all of these spells have in common is that they can be created by just one class, an arcane type caster or the wizard. And with the appropriate build, you can actually make yourself something like a code user in the world of Dungeons & Dragons. A sufficiently powerful wizard can eventually undergo a ritual that kills them, but then they come back to life as an immortal being or lich with their memories, and they can even become a patron and give power to mortals and allow them to use spells like Geass. So even the code user appears to have an equivalent in the world of Dungeons & Dragons. Finally, the newer gods in Dungeons & Dragons come into existence once enough people believe in them. Much like the collective unconscious in C's world is an artificial god that pools consciousness of people together after they die. So yeah, I thought this was extremely interesting while doing this research to find that there are so many similarities between the spells in Dungeons & Dragons and the world of Dungeons & Dragons, and of course, Geass Power and the world of Code Geass. Thanks again to Find a Bear and Divinity for their help. And let me know what you think down in the comments below. Are all of these similarities a coincidence, or did Dungeons & Dragons directly inspire Code Geass? As always, thank you so much for watching, and if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. And until next time, see ya! Space Cowboys!